Interesting how a single moment can flip your entire world upside down. My name is Kerry, and if you told me a year ago that I'd be walking into a courtroom to face my own parents, I would have laughed in disbelief. Yet there I was, stepping into a room filled with cold stares and smug expressions. My parents actually laughed when they saw me, certain I had already lost. But they had no idea what I brought with me, evidence they never imagined I could uncover. And the judge's reaction? It changed everything. I guess my story really began long before that courtroom day, long before the laughter, the lies, and the kind of betrayal I once thought only happened in movies. Growing up, I learned that my parents' love was conditional. It depended entirely on how useful I was to them, how much I obeyed, and how little I talked back. They believed they were royalty and everyone around them, including their own daughter, existed primarily to serve, admire, or validate them. My father used to say, respect is earned. But obedience? That's automatic. My mother echoed him with a smile so polished it almost hid the venom underneath. I didn't realize it back then, but everything, every compliment, every moment of affection, came with strings attached. And when I didn't do what they wanted, those strings became chains. When I turned 22, I moved out. I thought distance would give us peace. Instead, it triggered something ugly in them. Their control over me slipped, and in their minds, that was unforgivable. They started small, snide comments, guilt-tripping calls, exaggerated stories to relatives about how ungrateful I'd become. But the real turning point came when I inherited something they desperately wanted, my grandmother's house. It wasn't a mansion or anything extravagant, but it was mine. My grandmother left it to me because she knew how my parents operated. She once whispered to me, "You're the only one who listens without wanting something." So when she passed, I got the house, and my parents lost their minds. They demanded I do the right thing and sign the property over to them. According to them, I didn't deserve it. They had some carefully rehearsed speech about tradition, family hierarchy, and elders knowing best. But all I heard was entitlement coded in fake wisdom. When I refused, they escalated. First came the emotional warfare. Long messages telling me I was brainwashed, selfish, and destroying the family name. Then came the manipulation, telling relatives I'd stolen the house, lying that my grandmother had changed her mind before dying, even suggesting I forged something. But when all of that failed, they played their biggest card, they filed a lawsuit against me. A lawsuit. Against their own daughter. They claimed the will was fraudulent. That I manipulated my grandmother in her final days. That I coerced her into signing documents she didn't understand. It was such a twisted, sickening accusation that for a brief moment, I actually wondered how two people could hate their own child so much. But it wasn't hate, it was greed dressed as righteousness. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at the court summons, my hands shaking so badly that the pages rustled like fragile leaves. My parents had crossed a line I never believed they'd even approach. And the worst part? Everyone warned me that they were confident, almost smug, about winning. After all, my father had connections, and my mother knew how to play the perfect victim. But what they didn't know, and what I wasn't ready to reveal just yet, was that my grandmother had anticipated this. She had left something behind for me. Something powerful. Something my parents never expected. And while I didn't understand the full scope of it at first, I would soon learn that it had the strength to shatter every lie my parents built. The lawsuit forced me into a corner, but it also gave me clarity. If they wanted a fight, I would give it to them, but I wouldn't fight like they did, with manipulation and theatrics. I would fight with truth. And in the background of all the chaos, one thing became painfully clear: my parents didn't just want the house. They wanted control. Complete, suffocating control. And losing it, even slightly, was something they couldn't tolerate. The day I decided to stand my ground, really stand my ground, I stopped being their puppet and became their threat. And that, I think, is when this story truly began. Preparing for a court battle against your own parents is a special kind of heartbreak, one that gnaws at you at night and leaves a sour taste in your mouth every morning. I wasn't just collecting documents and building timelines. I was grieving the realization that the people who raised me would rather drag me through mud than admit they weren't entitled to everything I owned. But pain has a strange way of sharpening your senses, and so I did what I never imagined I would. I began investigating my own family. My grandmother and I had always shared a quiet bond, one built on small acts of kindness, afternoon tea, shared books, whispered jokes during family dinners where everyone else pretended to be perfect. She didn't trust easily, especially not the polished, smiling masks my parents wore. They perform, she once said with tired eyes. You live. I didn't understand what she meant until long after she was gone. A week after receiving the court summons, I went to her house, my house now, to look through her files. I hoped to find something, anything, that would prove she intentionally left the property to me. Half of me doubted I'd find more than old tax papers and dusty family photos. But when I opened the drawer of her mahogany desk, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small USB drive. The letter, written in her familiar looping script, stopped my breathing. Kerry, if you're reading this, it means your parents are trying to take what wasn't meant for them. This house was my apology to you, for allowing them to raise you without shielding you from their hunger for control. I fear they won't let you have a single thing without a war. So here is everything I documented. Use it if you must. I hope someday you'll forgive me. Her words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. My grandmother had known. She predicted this chaos long before I saw it coming. And the USB drive? That was the real gift. When I plugged it into my laptop, I expected a few documents. Instead, I found a treasure chest of evidence. Audio recordings of conversations with my mother, screenshots of text messages where my parents discussed making sure Kerry never gets a penny, copies of old wills, medical statements showing my grandmother was fully lucid and competent when she changed the will, a notarized document stating she made the decision without influence. Everything they claimed about me, manipulation, coercion, fraud, was disproven by my grandmother herself. But the most shocking discovery was a recorded phone call between my grandmother and my father. In it, he told her point blank that the house belongs to the family hierarchy. My grandmother responded with a level of steel I never heard from her in person. The only person with a heart in this family is Kerry. And that's why she gets it. My father exploded, calling her senile and insisting he had a right to the property. Hearing that recording made my stomach twist. I knew my father was controlling, but the venom in his voice told a truth I'd never been fully willing to admit. My parents didn't love me. Not really. Not unconditionally. They loved what they could extract from me. Armed with the drive, I thought the battle would be straightforward. Show the truth, win the case, move on. But nothing with my parents was ever that simple. They had hired a ruthless attorney, sharp suit, sharper tongue, the kind of lawyer whose smile never touched his eyes. He filed motion after motion, dragging the case out, attempting to drown me in legal fees. His strategy was clear: exhaustion. If he couldn't beat me with facts, he'd beat me with time and stress. Meanwhile, my parents paraded themselves as the victims of an ungrateful, emotionally unstable daughter who stole from the elders who raised her. They knew exactly how to twist narratives to make themselves appear noble and wounded. I watched distant relatives, neighbors, even old family friends post sympathetic comments on their social media pages, calling me heartless. They didn't know the truth, but my parents were masters at deception. Still, I stayed steady. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bending to their version of reality. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't shrinking. I was fighting with facts. Cold, undeniable facts. My lawyer, Ms. Harrington, was the opposite of my parents' attorney. She didn't raise her voice or posture. She wielded calm as a weapon. When I showed her the USB drive, she stared at it for a long moment and then said, "Kerry, you understand this changes everything." I nodded. "This isn't just strong evidence," she continued. "This is a complete annihilation of their case. But you need to be prepared for how they'll react." I swallowed. "Do you think they'll back down?" She looked at me with gentle pity. "People like your parents don't surrender. They escalate." And she was right. The weeks leading up to the hearing were hellish. My parents sent me lengthy messages filled with accusations and emotional daggers. They threatened to ruin me, swearing they'd bury me in court. They taunted me, calling me dramatic for hiring a lawyer, insisting I'd look pathetic and alone when the judge sided with them. But I wasn't alone. I had my grandmother's truth, and more importantly, I had myself finally choosing to stand up after years of bowing down. The night before the hearing, I lay awake replaying everything in my mind. All the lies. All the cruelty. All the moments where I tried so desperately to be a daughter they could love. And somewhere between those thoughts, I realized something liberating. I wasn't fighting for the house anymore. I was fighting for closure. And in that courtroom, I was going to get it. The morning of the hearing felt unreal, like I was floating inside someone else's life. The courthouse was colder than I expected, sterile white walls, polished floors, and echoes sharp enough to cut. I arrived early, hoping to gather myself before facing the two people who had turned my life upside down. But when I stepped through the double doors, any illusion of calm shattered instantly. There they were. My parents. Dressed like they were attending a royal ceremony instead of a legal battle they initiated. My father wore a pristine charcoal suit, his chin raised as if he owned the entire building. My mother clutched a stack of tissues she didn't need yet but planned to use theatrically. Their attorney stood beside them, flipping through papers like he was preparing to deliver a sermon. When my mother finally noticed me, her lips stretched into a smirk. "Oh look," she said loudly enough for half the hallway to hear, "she actually showed up." I thought she'd run away like she always does when she's caught lying. My father gave a chuckle, low, arrogant, dismissive. "Bold of you to drag this out," he added. "The judge is going to tear you apart, Kerry." It didn't sting the way I thought it would. If anything, their confidence felt pathetic. So predictable. So hollow. Before I could respond, Ms. Harrington appeared at my side like a shield materializing from thin air. "Good morning," she said in a neutral voice that offered neither warmth nor hostility. She addressed my parents' attorney with a curt nod. "Are you prepared?" My parents' lawyer gave a smug smile. "Very. This will be quick." Ms. Harrington didn't react. Instead, she turned to me. "Remember," she whispered, "truth doesn't panic." I took a deep breath. When the bailiff called us in, my parents strutted through the doorway like celebrities entering a spotlight. Their lawyer walked confidently behind them. I trailed last with Ms. Harrington, feeling a mix of dread and anticipation swirling inside my chest. The courtroom was larger than I expected. Tall windows lined the walls, letting in streams of sunlight that made the polished wooden benches shine. The judge, a stern-looking man with silver hair, adjusted his glasses as we took our seats. My parents sat to the right, leaving an empty space between them like they couldn't be bothered to sit closer. They didn't look at me again, why would they? In their minds, the outcome was already decided. The judge cleared his throat and glanced down at his documents. "We're here today regarding the claim filed by Mr. and Mrs. Carlton contesting the will of the late Eleanor Sutton. The defendants argue the will was manipulated and executed under duress by Ms. Kerry Sutton." His gaze lifted slowly. "Is this correct?" My parents' attorney rose. "Yes, Your Honor. We intend to demonstrate that Ms. Sutton took advantage of her grandmother's deteriorating mental state to transfer ownership of the property to herself." My mother let out a soft, rehearsed sniffle. My father stared straight ahead, jaw hard with feigned righteousness. "And the defense?" the judge asked. Ms. Harrington stood. "Your Honor, we are prepared to prove that not only was the will signed with full legal competence, but that Ms. Sutton's parents engaged in an extended campaign to obtain property not left to them. We also have documented evidence disproving every claim of coercion." The judge nodded. "Proceed." My parents' lawyer went first. He spoke with the confidence of someone who believed he was sculpting a masterpiece. He painted me as manipulative, greedy, deceitful. He claimed I alienated my grandmother, isolated her, and pressured her into giving me the property. He displayed photos of my grandmother looking tired in her final months, twisting them into a narrative of cognitive decline. My mother cried softly at all the right moments. My father sat rigidly with a grim expression that screamed fatherly disappointment. But as I listened, something strange happened. I felt detached. Like I was watching a badly written play about a girl who had nothing to do with me. When their attorney finally sat down, the judge turned to Ms. Harrington. "Your witness." She stood, calm as ever. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit Exhibit A." I watched with quiet satisfaction as she placed the USB drive on the evidence table. My parents stiffened. My mother's sobs stopped mid-breath. My father's jaw slackened, just slightly, enough to reveal the first crack in his armor. The judge leaned back. "Proceed." Ms. Harrington started with documents. Medical evaluations proving my grandmother was mentally competent. Time-stamped messages showing her clearly discussing her plans. Notarized papers verifying her signature. Then she pulled out the big gun, the recordings. The courtroom echoed with my father's voice, dripping with entitlement. The house belongs to the family hierarchy. This will isn't valid unless I approve it. She's too soft, she'll do what we want eventually. No one leaves anything to Kerry unless they're manipulated. She doesn't deserve property. Each sentence felt like a stone dropping into a silent pond. My mother's voice followed next, cruel and dismissive. Kerry has no direction. She doesn't need the house. We can sell it and use the money properly. People in the courtroom began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. But the recording that delivered the true blow was my grandmother's. I'm leaving it to Kerry because she has a heart. She has integrity. And if they fight this, it proves exactly why they can't be trusted with it. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared at the table like it betrayed him. And for the first time since entering the courtroom, I saw fear in their eyes. Fear of the truth. Fear of consequences. Fear of losing control. And that fear was only beginning. The moment my grandmother's voice echoed through the courtroom speakers, the atmosphere shifted. My parents, who had spent years projecting dominance and control, were now silent. Their rehearsed confidence, their staged drama, crumbled in real time. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he absorbed every word, every piece of evidence, every undeniable truth. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, heartbeat steady. Years of fear, of doubt, of bending to their will, finally felt like dust beneath my feet. The courtroom, once an arena of anxiety, became a stage where justice had a voice, and it wasn't theirs. My mother tried to compose herself, dabbing at her eyes as if crying on cue could salvage their narrative. But the recordings, the notarized papers, and the documented conversations were relentless. You can't fake authenticity in a court of law, and she, for the first time, realized that. My father's usual smirk had disappeared, replaced by a rigid tension that made him look decades older. He shifted in his seat, muttering under his breath, as if denying the evidence could somehow erase it. The judge finally spoke, his tone cutting and deliberate. Mr. and Mrs. Carlton, the evidence presented by the defendant is comprehensive and indisputable. The documents, recordings, and notarized declarations conclusively demonstrate that Miss Kerry Sutton acted in accordance with her grandmother's wishes. Further, the claims of manipulation and coercion on her part are without merit. His gaze swept over them. Your assertions, while confident, fail to align with reality. A gasp traveled through the courtroom. My parents' attorney opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, but the judge held up a hand. No interruptions. Your client's attempt to distort facts has been noted, and it will not influence this court's decision. I felt a surge of vindication. This was it. The moment every lie and every act of entitlement was being dismantled publicly. The truth wasn't just acknowledged, it was celebrated in the silence that followed the judge's words. My parents couldn't laugh, couldn't manipulate, couldn't coerce. The power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Then came the clincher. Ms. Harrington, composed and precise, added, Your Honor, we also have recorded communications in which Mr. and Mrs. Carlton explicitly discussed their intent to undermine Ms. Sutton's inheritance. These conversations prove premeditation, intent to deceive, and attempts to obstruct the lawful transfer of property. We submit them for review. The judge's expression darkened slightly, a clear signal that the weight of this evidence was not lost on him. He paused, then addressed my parents directly, Mr. Carlton, Mrs. Carlton, do you understand the severity of what has been presented? Not only have you challenged your daughter unjustly, but you have attempted to manipulate legal proceedings for personal gain. This court does not look kindly upon such behavior. My mother tried to respond, her voice quivering. But Your Honor. The judge cut her off. No further statements unless directed. Your daughter has provided incontrovertible evidence. Any objections must be grounded in fact, not conjecture or entitlement. I sat back, absorbing the scene. Their faces, once smug and untouchable, were now etched with disbelief. Every calculated gesture, every manipulative tactic, every rehearsed performance had failed spectacularly. I realized that this was more than a legal victory, It was the culmination of years of resilience, of quietly surviving in a household where love was conditional and control was paramount. Witnesses were called, further validating my grandmother's intentions and confirming the integrity of the will. Each testimony reinforced the narrative: I had acted honorably, my parents had acted out of greed, and the property rightfully belonged to me. The courtroom was a stage, and every piece of testimony was a hammer driving home a final, undeniable truth. At one point, I caught a glimpse of my parents' expressions. My mother's eyes were wide, almost panicked, while my father's jaw clenched so tightly it seemed as though he might crack a tooth. The arrogance that had defined their interactions with me for decades was completely gone. They were finally witnessing the consequences of entitlement unchecked by morality or law. The tension reached its peak when the judge, leaning back in his chair, delivered a statement that would forever change the dynamic of our family. This court rules in favor of Ms. Kerry Sutton. The property in question shall remain under her legal ownership, and any attempts to contest this decision further may result in sanctions. Justice has been served. Silence enveloped the room. The parents, usually quick to react with anger or manipulation, sat frozen. Their attorney looked at them, perplexed and helpless. I felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. After years of enduring manipulation, condescension, and entitlement, I had finally reclaimed not only my property but my dignity. As I stood to leave, the courtroom seemed lighter, as though the weight of unspoken truths had lifted. My parents followed behind, subdued, their previous laughter now replaced by stunned silence. For the first time, I understood that some victories aren't just about winning, they're about witnessing the unraveling of those who tried to diminish you. And that unraveling had only just begun. Walking out of that courtroom felt surreal. The sunlight hitting the courthouse steps was blinding, almost symbolic, as if the universe was finally shining on a truth that had been hidden for far too long. My parents followed behind, their steps heavy, silent, weighed down by a mix of shock, humiliation, and disbelief. Every laugh, every snide comment, every attempt to manipulate had been rendered meaningless. The judge's words echoed in my mind: justice doesn't bend for entitlement. It doesn't negotiate with greed. It only recognizes the truth. I remember the moment I saw my parents' expressions in full detail for the first time after the ruling. My mother's lips were pressed tightly together, eyes darting to the ground as though if she avoided looking at me, the loss would somehow be reversed. My father's usual arrogance had been replaced with a stunned, almost childlike confusion, like someone realizing that all their carefully constructed power and control had been utterly dismantled in front of an entire courtroom. People began to congratulate me quietly as I walked past them. Some of the court staff smiled, others nodded, and a few whispered words of encouragement. Each gesture reinforced what I had already known in my heart: I had not only defended what was rightfully mine, I had stood up against the very people who were supposed to protect and guide me, and I had prevailed. For once, I felt seen, respected, and validated in a way that years of trying to please my parents could never achieve. The drive home afterward was quiet. I replayed the entire ordeal in my mind: the preparation, the evidence, the recordings, the judge's unwavering attention to detail, and the expressions of my parents as their world began to crumble. In a strange way, I felt lighter. Years of emotional manipulation, guilt, and fear had been carried for decades, and now, a significant portion of that burden was gone. I knew, of course, that nothing could completely erase the pain they had inflicted, nor could it undo the years of strained interactions and conditional love. But I also realized that their power over me had been fundamentally broken. That day, the court didn't just award me a house, it reaffirmed my right to boundaries, to respect, and to the life I had chosen for myself. For the first time, I felt truly autonomous. My parents were silent for most of the ride home. My mother occasionally glanced at me, her expression hard to read, some mix of resentment, disbelief, and perhaps, a flicker of realization that the game she had always played had finally failed. My father stared out the window, jaw clenched, as though willing the world to be different, unwilling to acknowledge the loss. Their arrogance had been stripped away, leaving them to confront the stark truth: entitlement and greed can only get you so far when confronted with honesty, integrity, and courage. In the days that followed, messages poured in from friends, distant relatives, and even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. They expressed disbelief at the lengths my parents had gone to, admiration for my composure, and congratulations for standing up for myself. Each note reminded me that truth resonates and that people recognize strength when they see it, even if the perpetrators of injustice cannot. Despite the legal victory, the emotional work wasn't over. Healing from years of manipulation and betrayal would take time. I began attending therapy, journaling, and reflecting deeply on the lessons learned. I also made a conscious decision to set firm boundaries with my parents, limiting contact and insisting on mutual respect, or none at all. For the first time, I prioritized my own mental and emotional health over their expectations or entitlement. Looking back now, the courtroom was only one battleground among many I had faced in life. Yet, it was the most significant because it made a public statement: abuse, manipulation, and entitlement have consequences. My parents could no longer dismiss me, belittle me, or attempt to control me with their false narratives. The court had recognized my right to stand firm, and that validation empowered me in ways nothing else ever could. I will never forget the exact moment the judge pronounced his ruling. The silence that fell over my parents, their failed attempts to maintain composure, and the faint, almost imperceptible trembling in their expressions, all of it reinforced the lesson I had learned the hard way. No one has the right to belittle you or claim your life, your property, or your dignity, regardless of blood or societal expectation. Truth, integrity, and resilience will always prevail. In the end, standing outside that courtroom, I finally understood something I had spent my entire life chasing: freedom from people who believed they owned me. The judge didn't just rule in my favor, he gave me the validation I never received from my parents. Their silence, once filled with arrogant laughter, was the final closure I needed. I walked away not as someone who won a case, but as someone who reclaimed her life. And maybe, just maybe, that is the greatest victory any of us can have.